On the morning of the memorial, the parade field at the Naval Academy gleamed like glass. Cadets marched with sharp precision, their dress whites catching the early sun. Families of fallen sailors filed into neat rows of folding chairs. Flags stirred faintly in the breeze. Everyone noticed the dignitaries, the admirals, the brass. No one noticed the old man pushing a mower along the far edge of the field. He looked like nobody, a groundskeeper, just another worker trimming the grass before the ceremony. His back was stooped, his steps slow, and his cap stained with years of sweat and sunlight. The cadets called him Mower Man. Some snickered about how long it took him to finish a single row. He didn't seem to hear them. He just pushed the mower, steady, methodical, as if the lines he carved in the grass mattered more than the laughter behind his back. The morning air carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and salt from the bay. A military band tuned their instruments near the stage. Everything was choreographed, everything precise. The memorial was for sailors who had given their lives in the line of duty. But that day, as the motorcade of black Suburbans rolled onto the grounds and a four-star Admiral stepped out, everything changed. Because when Admiral James Hartford saw the old man with the mower, he froze. His aide continued walking, then stopped, confused. The superintendent stepped forward to greet the Admiral, hand extended, but Hartford didn't see him. His eyes were locked on the bent figure in faded work clothes. And in front of hundreds of cadets, families, and officers, the Admiral did the unthinkable. He came to attention, turned toward the groundskeeper, and snapped the sharpest salute of his life. His name was Walter Briggs, 79 years old. He had been working the academy grounds for 15 years. Every hedge trimmed, every flower bed planted, every blade of grass on the parade field. It was Walter's unseen handiwork. He wore the same faded work pants every day, boots with cracked leather, and a cap that had once been navy blue, but had long since surrendered its color to the sun. The cadets knew him only in passing. They saw him pushing a mower, dragging a hose, raking leaves. Some mornings he arrived before dawn, setting up sprinklers or repairing irrigation lines. He worked with a quiet intensity, never rushing, never cutting corners. The grounds were his responsibility, and he treated them with a reverence that seemed out of place. They didn't know his past, and he didn't tell them. His face was weathered, his eyes quiet. Deep lines ran from the corners of his eyes, the kind earned from squinting against the sun for decades. His hands were thick and calloused, marked with old scars that had long since turned white. He ate lunch from a brown paper sack in the shade of an oak. He clocked in and clocked out, never drawing attention. To most, he was invisible. The maintenance crew knew him as reliable. If Walter said he would finish a job, it got done. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was low and steady. Some of the younger workers found him intimidating, but invisible men sometimes carry the heaviest histories. In 1967, Walter Briggs had been a Navy diver. Not the kind who worked on offshore rigs or inspected hulls in peaceful harbors. He was a combat diver, trained for the worst conditions imaginable. The war in Vietnam had no shortage of missions no one wanted to speak of. Recovery operations in dangerous waters, sabotage runs, desperate rescues. Briggs was the man they called when no one else could do it. His training had been brutal. Underwater demolition, cold water survival, night dives in zero visibility. He learned to stay calm when his lungs screamed for air, to navigate by touch in the dark, to cut through metal while being tossed by currents. That summer off the coast of Da Nang, a destroyer took heavy damage after striking an underwater mine. The explosion tore through the hull. Dozens were injured. Some were trapped below deck as compartments flooded. The sea churned violently around the damaged vessel. Panic reigned. Men screamed for help as water rushed through corridors. The captain made the call. They needed divers. Now. Walter and his dive team went into the water without hesitation. The sea was dark and churning, littered with debris. He dove into the blackness, a torch in one hand, a cutting blade in the other. The noise underwater was deafening, the groan of stressed metal, the rush of flooding compartments, the muffled thuds of secondary explosions. He found the first man pinned beneath a collapsed bulkhead. Walter cut through twisted steel, fighting currents that threatened to pin him against the wreckage. His hands bled from jagged edges, but he didn't stop. He pulled the sailor free, signaled to his teammate to get the man to the surface, then went back down. Again and again. For hours in the water. Hours of freezing dark, of hands shredded on jagged metal, of lungs burning with exhaustion. Other divers came and went, rotating out when they reached their limits. Walter stayed longer than anyone, pushing past exhaustion. He knew the layout of the ship by memory now, knew which compartments were lost and which still had air pockets. More than a dozen men lived because Walter Briggs refused to quit. One of them was a young lieutenant named James Hartford, trapped in a flooded engine room with two enlisted men. Walter found them with minutes to spare, their air nearly gone. He got them out, working with another diver to bring each man up safely, one by one, in the dark. When it was over, Walter surfaced for the last time, his body shaking from cold and exhaustion. He refused medical attention until every other man had been treated. The Navy wanted to give him the Navy Cross. Walter refused the ceremony. "I just did my job," he said, walking away from the paperwork. "My team did more. The men who didn't make it, they're the ones who deserve to be remembered." When his service ended, he didn't attend the parades or the reunions. He found work where no one asked questions, maintaining lawns, planting trees, repairing irrigation systems. The quiet suited him. The noise of the world felt too loud after the silence underwater. Decades later, Hartford was no longer a lieutenant. He was a four-star admiral, one of the most powerful men in the Navy. His career had been distinguished: command of carrier strike groups, strategic postings at the Pentagon, deployments to conflict zones around the world. When he stepped out of his motorcade that morning, the cadets snapped to attention. The academy superintendent shook his hand. Photographers raised their cameras. Hartford had given dozens of speeches at memorials like this. And then Hartford saw him, the old man by the mower. Bent back, slow steps. But Hartford recognized the eyes. Even from across the field, even after all these years, he saw the hands scarred across the knuckles from steel that no glove could protect. He remembered those hands pulling him from a flooding passageway while the world collapsed around them. The Admiral's pace slowed. He stopped speaking to the superintendent mid-sentence. His expression changed, sharp authority dissolving into something raw. His aide noticed first. "Sir, is everything all right?" Hartford didn't answer. He walked away from the reviewing stand, past the reporters, past the lines of cadets. Every head turned as the Admiral crossed the field toward the groundskeeper. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Walter looked up, confused. His hand still rested on the mower handle. For a moment, he didn't recognize the man in the dress uniform striding toward him. Then their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition, memory. Admiral Hartford stopped 3 feet away. Then before the entire crowd, he snapped to attention. His back straightened, his heels clicked together. His salute cracked through the silence like a gunshot. "Chief Briggs," Hartford's voice boomed, carrying to the farthest row of cadets. "It is an honor, Chief." The cadets gasped. Some whispered. The superintendent's jaw tightened in shock. The mower man had just been addressed as chief, and a four-star admiral was saluting him with a respect that transcended rank. Walter didn't move. His face barely changed, but his eyes, for the first time that morning, softened. "You were a lieutenant back then," he said quietly. Hartford's voice broke. "Yes, Chief, and I wouldn't be here if not for you." "None of us would." The Admiral lowered his salute slowly. "I've thought about that day every year since. I've wondered if I'd ever get the chance to say thank you." Walter shook his head slightly. "You don't owe me anything, son. You'd have done the same." "Maybe," Hartford said, "but you did it. You went back down when everyone else was at their limit. You and your team saved over a dozen men that day, Chief. A dozen families got their sons and husbands and fathers back because you wouldn't quit." Around them, the crowd had gone completely silent. The parade field, moments ago buzzing with nervous energy, fell silent. One by one, cadets raised their hands in salute. Officers followed. A wave of respect swept across the grounds until hundreds of arms were raised toward a man with a mower. The band members stood at attention. The families rose to their feet. Walter Briggs did not bask in it. He gave a small nod, almost embarrassed. To him, the salute was not for himself, but for the men who never came back, for the faces that still visited him in his dreams. "At ease," he said softly, then louder, "At ease, all of you." The salutes dropped, but the respect remained. From that day on, the cadets no longer called him Mower Man. They called him Chief. They sought him out, asked him questions. Sometimes he would answer with a story, never about himself, but about the men he'd served with. Sometimes he would just smile and say, "Do your duty. Help your shipmate. The rest takes care of itself." The Academy later added a line to the training curriculum. Every plebe learned about Walter Briggs and the forgotten divers who saved lives in silence. They called it the Briggs Lesson. Respect every person you meet. You never know whose hands once held the line when everything was falling apart. Admiral Hartford visited Walter 3 more times before the end. They would sit under the oak tree, sharing lunch, talking about old times. Hartford brought other officers who had been on that ship, men who wanted to shake Walter's hand. That spring, Walter was seen less on the mower. His steps grew slower, his breath shorter, but the cadets made sure the parade field stayed trimmed. They took turns finishing the lines he had started, out of respect, out of gratitude. On the day Walter Briggs passed away, the Academy held a small ceremony at dawn. No press, no headlines, just cadets, officers, and an admiral who owed his life to him. They lowered the flag to half-mast. Admiral Hartford stood, tears streaming down his face, saluting one last time. They buried Walter with full military honors. A folded flag, a rifle salute, taps played over the bay. And on his headstone, beneath his name and dates, they carved a single line. He saved many. He asked for nothing. The parade field still gleams like glass every morning. And somewhere in the quiet hours before dawn, you might see a cadet pushing a mower with the same methodical care, honoring the lesson of a man who knew that every task, no matter how small, matters. The truth is, there are thousands of Walters out there, men and women who held the line when everything was collapsing, who made choices no one should have to make, who carried others when they could barely stand themselves. Most of them never made the news, never got the medal ceremony, never asked for one. They're bagging groceries, fixing cars in small-town garages, coaching Little League on Saturday mornings, and unless you know what to look for, the way they carry themselves, a faded unit patch on an old jacket, the distance in their eyes when a helicopter passes overhead, you'd never guess what they've seen, but they're everywhere, and they deserve to be remembered. If this story made you pause and wonder about the silent warriors around you, consider subscribing to Echo Bravo. We share the stories that slip through the cracks, the ones that matter most. Because here's the truth. Heroism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just showing up when no one else will.